So today we're going to talk about visible mending and specifically a technique called darning, which is great for knits. And we're going to use these darning mushrooms, and you can use an egg too. Today we're going to use some mushrooms. You can also do the same kind of technique using like an embroidery hoop or even something that has a rounded surface like this, like maybe a piece of fruit or a gourd or a potato is something I've heard, or if you have some kind of weird object in your house, like a paperweight or something. If you just want to try it once, if you're going to do this a lot, I do recommend getting one of these because it makes it a lot easier. And you're going to want a rubber band, and you're going to need a needle or a couple of needles. Depending on what fabric you're using, you might want something really large and blunt, and long is good. If it has a little bit of a curved tip, that can be really helpful too, make it easier. For any kind of like knit fabric, it's good for it to have a blunt tip. Think about it like weaving in your ends, or similar to knitting techniques where you would use a yarn needle. If you're doing it on a woven fabric or like a really fine knit, you might need a sharper tip, something like this. Definitely long is helpful, so you can go across the whole darn, but if all you have is shorter, that's okay, it's gonna work too. Very versatile technique. And then you're gonna need some yarn or thread for your darning. I do a lot of my darning with hawthorn because it's really, it's like a tight twist sock yarn that has the nylon content. It's very durable, and it has a ton of great colors, which I love doing my darning in colorful yarns, especially if it's on a non-colorful item. Can add a pop of color. That's really fun. It is going to be like a little bit bulky depending on, especially if you're darning an actual sock. If you're using hawthorn yarn, it's going to add more layers of sock yarn. You might want something finer, so you might use an embroidery floss, or curio is great, which is cotton, and it's very smooth. It's really easy to weave with. It's not gonna snag like wool might a little bit, so it might be a little bit easier to try this technique for the first time with more of a cotton yarn or embroidery floss. And curio comes in 2 different weights, so you can use a heavier weight for heavier fabric that you're darning, or a lighter weight for a lighter fabric. It's generally recommended that you use a similar weight when you're darning a knit to the weight of the yarn that was used to knit the item. I don't always follow that, but that can be a good guideline to get started. So that's your tools, and next I'll show you some different examples of what we're gonna learn. So basically what darning is filling in a hole in your object, in your item, with a new fabric that you're gonna create with your yarn or thread by kind of weaving over the hole. So the first way I'm going to show you is great for if your hole has developed from being worn out and the area around the hole is also like thinning, and you want to reinforce the whole area around the hole as well as to fill in the hole. So what you're going to do is do running stitches like all in the whole area around the hole, like as far out as it's become thinned out. So you want to go all the way to where it's like no longer thin basically. And you're going to go running stitches back and forth, and then when you reach the hole, you're just going to have your strands going over the hole, and then you go the other way, back and forth, and then you weave where the hole is, and you create this woven fabric where the hole is. So we're going to show you how to do that. And then the other method, you're going to create a woven patch basically over the hole. So this is good. You either do a large area, so you're covering the whole area that's worn out, or if you have like a knit item that just a yarn strand broke in one spot, it's not really worn out or thinned out around it, it's just like that one hole, and that's all you have to deal with. This is fun for that because you make, basically it's like a patch, but you're making the patch directly on the fabric. So you're gonna make like a warp and a weft, and I'm not a weaver, so I'm not gonna be very technical about that. You're weaving and tacking it down on every time you reach the end. So we're gonna show you that technique too. And then this below here is another little example of kind of the first technique with the running stitches. If you don't have an actual hole, if all you have is an area that's worn out, and it looks like it will become a hole if you don't deal with it. So you're just going back and forth, and you're not having to worry about like the actual woven hole. That's good for just, you know, in this case I had a hole right here, and then I had this area here that was a little bit worn out. So I just did one of each. So you can kind of look at what's going on with your sock. This one here, I had a couple spots. Here I had like a very small hole and then some worn out area, and here I just had some worn out area that hadn't actually become a hole. So I used some thin wool mending thread, which is like thinner than a sock weight yarn. And I just went back and forth and back and forth. And I'm going to show you how to deal with these ends also as part of the tutorial. So I left these ends here to show you. Basically that's like the running stitch method and like the patch method are the two. But as you can see, there's like variations. You could do like a very small patch. This is an example of a very large patch, but you can do a small patch if you have a small hole. It's all very versatile and flexible, and you can kind of play around and experiment with it a lot. So first we're going to be showing you the running stitch technique. I have it halfway done on this one. You can see it's just going in one direction only. We're going to start fresh with this new hole here using a darning mushroom. Start by putting the mushroom in where the hole is. And you want to smooth the hole over the mushroom, but don't stretch it. You want it to just be smoothed but not stretched. Just kind of like how it'll be when you're wearing it on your foot. In this case, it's a heel of a sock. If it's a sweater, it won't be as curved. Just you want it to be kind of like how it will be when you're wearing it. You take that rubber band. If your egg or mushroom doesn't have this indentation like this one has, then you can just put it around the base like that. This one has this nice indentation here for it to go around. Just gonna put it like that. And see that? And now you can hold the handle in your hand and you don't have to worry about holding it so it stays the same, like the rubber band is holding it in place, so you're just holding it for comfort. If there's little pieces of lint, get them off of there. It's not a big deal. I'm not always super precise about cleaning it up, but if you do have like stray ends, you can clean those up, make it a nice clean hole. And you want to cut your yarn or thread. I'm using Curio for this one. So you're going to need a decent length for both steps. You can do one at a time in different colors, but you never want to cut a longer length of thread or yarn than the length of your arm generally, or a little bit longer than your arm because part of it's going to be folded over. It's just going to tangle a lot easier. The longer it is, the easier it's going to tangle. So I would stretch my arm like that and cut it about as long as my arm. Put that aside. Thread it onto the needle. And you're not going to double it up unless you're using like a finer thread. If you need to double it up, but I'm not going to. You also don't want to tie a knot at the end or tie a knot onto your fabric, because you don't want a knot, especially if it's on somewhere like the heel of a sock. It could be annoying. And also for flexibility, we're just going to weave in the end at the end, kind of like how you weave in your ends with knitting. But what I like to do is put the needle in about an inch or more away from where I'm going to start. So first of all, you're going to look at where you're going to want to do your patch. I'm doing the running stitch method, so I'm going to go about an inch or 3/4 of an inch or so, like outside of the hole. Now this area here is very thinned out, so I want to make sure my running stitches go past all of this area here, so that's all nice and filled in. And then of course the hole itself. Where I'm going to start at one corner is going to be right around like here. So I'm going to put my needle in an inch or so or more away and just run it like this to where I want it to come out. And what that's going to do is just create the tail on the wrong side with this long loop on the wrong side. So when I'm all the way done, I'm going to turn this inside out and there's going to be that loop, which will make it really easy to pull onto the wrong side and weave it in on the wrong side. And also, it's kind of out of my way now. Like I can hold it with my thumb, it's not going to get in the way. If the tail was right here, it's going to get in the way more. So that's just kind of the easy way that I like to handle ends. Now I'm going to start in either direction, just doing a real simple running stitch. Also, the way I like to do this is a bit scrappy, freehand. It's called visible mending. It's supposed to be visible. It's supposed to look handmade. That's kind of the aesthetic of it. I like that about it. So I don't usually draw with fabric marker or chalk where I want my mend to be or my patch to be, but a lot of people do that, which is totally fine. If you feel like you just want a little bit of a template to follow, I guess, as you're going back and forth. You can use chalk or fabric marker, depending on what kind of fabric it is, and draw a box and then follow that box to make it have a little bit cleaner lines. If that's the kind of aesthetic you like. Totally fine, personal preference. So you go up the first length up to almost as high as you want it to go. You're gonna make one more stitch at the end and then go over to the side for that last stitch. So you're gonna move each one over because you're gonna do back and forth over along the whole way. So I did that one last stitch going up and then over to the side. And it's good to like stagger, not have the lines be all in the same place. So I didn't just go straight over, I went over and down a little bit so that this line will be kind of staggered. Again, I'm not super precise about exactly where my running stitches are, but I just try to make them approximately the opposite of the previous line. You can see I'm not doing the exact stitch, so it's like exactly back and forth checkerboard, but it's just like, you don't want them to be in the exact same spot every time. So be as precise or as scrappy as you like to be, and that's fine. So I'm going back and forth to the bottom. In this area right here, where it's not actually worn very thin, this area here is like pretty solid. I'm not worried about it being very close together because I'm not really needing to create a whole new fabric in this area. This is just kind of the edges. When I'm over here, I'm going to want these two to be a bit closer together just because this is a pretty thin thread, and by going back and forth, you're kind of creating like a new layer of fabric for durability. And with as far apart as these lines are, that's not exactly a new layer of fabric. So just get closer together when it's more thinned out, and you get further apart when it's denser. All right, and I'm getting to the edge of the hole now. Can still go in here, right at the edge of the hole. Up to the top. And I'm using a pretty sharp needle just because I kind of prefer it with the running stitch method. It's easier to go in and out, up and down with the sharper needle. But depending on what kind of knit fabric you're working with, you might prefer a blunter needle. So I'm going to make sure I'm getting a little bit closer together now that I'm reaching the actual hole, because I'm going to want these lines to be close enough together to create a woven fabric. And here I am at the edge of the hole for the first time. So when you reach the hole, you're just going across the hole to the other side. And then pick it back up on the other side. So that's my first strand that's across the hole. And you're just going to keep doing that all the way across the hole. So I'm just going to go a little bit faster now because you got the idea. All right, so we're going to continue on now. This is the other heel, so it's going to look a bit different than the first one. I already had it set up. So this one, it's a little bit looser than is ideal in the hole part. It would be cool if it was a little bit closer together. I got a little bit rushed maybe, that'll happen. So I'm gonna make sure the other side is close enough together so that that becomes a good fabric in there. Also, if you end up doing it too loose, because it's kind of hard the first time you do it, you can always go back over the hole later. You know, you can do the whole thing and then see where the loose area is and kind of go over it again. So that's fine. Again, very flexible, easy to add to later, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to go in with a different color. I'm going to do the same thing where I start over here next to this existing tail. I'm going to bring it over here. I'm going to go a bit outside the area where these running stitches ended so I can have flexibility kind of staggering around the outside here. Leave a little bit of a loose tail like that. And just start basically doing the same thing. When you're in the area where the fabric is fine. You don't have to worry about exactly going under and over the running stitches because you're not actually weaving, you're just kind of doing the running stitches back and forth, so just be a little bit quick and scrappy about it. Back and forth. I'll speed through this bit up until I reach the hole, and then I'll show you what happens there. All right, so we're getting to the point now where this is kind of the last one below where the hole's gonna start. So getting a little bit more careful with making sure I go over, under, at a good rate, kind of, because I'm gonna start like actually weaving in a second. Still doing kind of the same thing. And what I mean by that is when you get to the thinned out area, it's like, I think a little bit more important to switch your over, under on each row, you know? So now I'm going, you know, over where I went under last time and under where I went over last time, generally, because then when you get to the actual woven part, you're gonna be really careful about going over, under each thread, and it might be helpful, especially if you have a sharp needle like I have. A blunter needle is better for the actual weaving part, so you might want to make a choice that's kind of a little bit blunt. It's harder when it's sharp. Okay, so you go over, under each one until you reach the other side, and then reach the other side. I'm still trying to do the opposite of what I did in the last line. And you do the same thing at the ends as we've been doing. Up to where this, over, under, it got a little weird at the end there. That's fine, it's fine. The only really important spot that you make sure you do over, under in the correct order is the actual hole itself. So make sure you're going over the one that went under last time and under the one that went over last time. Back and forth. And you know what? If your sharp needle is being annoying, especially if you're using like a wool instead of a cotton, you can switch and use the back side, the other side of your needle, just for the woven section. Might be a little bit easier. Like that. And then you kind of push it down each time. That's not gonna be enough. Once you start weaving more, you're gonna need to push it down. I use the back of the needle for this too, like this. Especially as you get higher up, you're gonna wanna make sure you're pushing those down as much as possible because you want that fabric to be as dense as possible. Right here, the sock got in the way a little, so it won't push down all the way, but that's gonna be okay. Anyway, just keep going, over, under, and back and forth, and that's the idea. We'll speed up a minute again, and then I'll show you what I mean about pushing it down. All right, so now I'm kind of to the end of the whole area, so the last few times I've been making sure I push it down. This is a little bit of a loose weave. If your weave is tighter, it's going to be a little bit more work to make sure you get it pushed down all the way. So basically your goal is to make it as dense of a fabric as possible so you can't really see through it. So as you get to the end, it gets a little bit trickier. Again, I'm using the back of the needle, so it's blunt. If you're using a blunt needle, then you're fine. Same as usual. on the other parts. And once you finish the whole area and you have it all woven in, then you're just back to the plain running stitches above it. And there's nothing special you have to do to finish it or anything. Just do the same thing you've been doing on the top part. I won't worry about finishing it. Just all the way up to the top. And you're done. And I'll show you how to actually weave in your ends at the end, but that's pretty easy. That's the idea of it. You got your actual like woven fabric where the hole was, and then you have all the stitches around. You can go out further. You can make like a circle shape or get more organic with your outline. Definitely play with colors. You can use multicolored yarn, so it'll create more of like a plaid look. You can switch colors halfway through, so you have like different color blocking, all kinds of ways you can have fun with it. All right, so now we're gonna do the kind of patch technique. First we did the technique where it goes outside the hole, which is good for if it's worn out outside the hole. Now this hole I have in a knit sweater, it's really just the hole itself. It's not really worn out around the outside of it. So we're just gonna do the patch technique, which it'll go a little bit around the outside, but it's just gonna have clear straight lines around the patch. You can, once you get more experience, you can do like round patches or even like shapes with your patches. If you use chalk or fabric marker would be kind of hard on actual knit, but you can experiment more. Definitely look at other tutorials for more advanced techniques, but we're just gonna do a basic square right here. We're gonna use the heavier curio and a smaller mushroom. Same as before, you wanna make sure it's just kind of smooth, but not stretched. And just put the hole right on the center, as centered as possible. A little bit harder when it's a thicker knit. But once it's in there, it'll be secure. Right. It's a little bit stretched, but yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too stretched. And you can clean it up a little. If I was doing this for myself, I might not even bother because it's not too messy, but just trim off a little bit of the ends so they don't get in the way. And then cut my curio. And I'm just gonna cut it as long as my arm, because if it's longer than that, it's more likely to get tangled. And for this, I'm definitely using a blunt needle. There's no need to use a sharp needle for a heavier knit like this. It's gonna be easier with a blunt needle. And I'm using one with a curved end, which is gonna make it a little bit easier to weave in and out. It's not necessary, but it can be helpful and just make it go a little bit faster and easier for you. So again, I will start over farther away from where I want to actually start. And when I do this, I'm making sure I'm touching the wood of the mushroom. So I'm all the way on the other side. I think I'm going to use this rib line as kind of my line, my outside line. Now for this method, this first step I'm going to do isn't absolutely required, but it is recommended, especially if you have kind of a thinner fabric than this. Like if I was doing this for myself, I probably wouldn't even bother with this because it's a thicker knit, but it's helpful to just do a running stitch outline around where you want your patch to be, and then you're going to do your patch just outside of that outline, so the outline itself will be hidden away. It'll kind of stabilize the edge of the patch a little bit and just act as a guideline for you to follow. So it's more, the stabilizing part is more important if the fabric is a little bit thin on the inside of the patch. You don't want to attach the patch to a thinned out, worn out fabric because it might tear. You want to make sure that the thinned out area is only on the inside of the patch, not the outside, but this will still help with a little extra stability to do this running stitch. Just kind of making an outline, up and down. Oops. And with this step, it's actually a little bit harder for it to be the curved tip. It'd be a little easier if it was straighter, but when we get to the weaving, I think it's going to be a little bit easier for it to be the curved tip. Okay, and then when you get to the end, you're going to get set up for your first row across. Again, you can go either direction first and second. I usually just go side to side first, then up and down second. So what you're going to do is hook. I usually do socks, which have a much thinner, finer knit than this. I'll probably do 2 strands of yarn per stitch just to make sure. If it's only 1 strand of yarn, it might be a little bit more likely to pull a stitch. So I'm going to go 2 strands over. You just want to hook enough of the fabric for it to be stable, for it not to pull anything out or, you know, cause even more damage. You want it to be a real stable, secure kind of stitch on each side. And then you're going to go all the way across the other side. Same thing. Make sure I'm far enough over to hide that running stitch. I mean, I'm really going to hide the running stitch when I go across the other way. I think because this is so thick, I'll grab the stitch I already went through and then the one next to it. That only applies if you're doing a heavier gauge knit like this is. Hold that down with my thumb. So you're just going back and forth to create your warp, I believe it's called, if you're a weaver. I am not a weaver. These are getting a little weird when I'm going through the same loop. I think it'll be okay when we actually do the weaving. All right, I'll speed through the rest of this side. All right, so I'm reaching the end. I ran out of yarn about 2/3 of the way through, so joined a new one. If that happens, you can switch to a new color if you want some color variety. I just kept it the same. I think that'll be the last one. And now I'm gonna just use the same yarn to go in the other direction. If you want to change colors now with the other direction. If you're keeping the same color, you might as well just not have any extra ends and just continue going. So I'm just going to take this where it is right now and weave it through. My tip is blunt, like I said before, so I don't have to worry about it really snagging too much on the yarn or the thread. I did this weird method that made it cross over itself, so I'll just do it how it is at the end here, and then that's that's just how it's going to be. I guess the other side is just going to kind of twist over itself, which looks kind of cool, so that should be fine. So just go under, over, one end to the other. This time you're not worrying about where the hole is and where the knot hole is, you're just doing the same thing the whole time. You're not actually going through the knit fabric at all. You're just going over, under your patch, your darning thread yarn on top of the fabric. So the only place you're going through the fabric itself is along all the edges to tack it down. So it really is just like a patch that's sewn along the edges. So when you get to the end, there's that running stitch there. You want to make sure you're on the other side of the running stitch to hide it. So you take a good stable stitch there at the end and go back the other way and make sure you're doing the opposite. Where you went over, you're now going under, and where you went under, you're now going over. If you have a very long needle, you can do this all in one go, but it might be easier to do like half and then the other half. Again, the weird crossover thing that's happening is because it's a really heavy knit, which made it so I had to like do extra big stitches so they overlapped each other. That's normally not going to be an issue. If you're working on a lighter knit like socks or woven fabric, your stitches will all just be next to each other, so they're not going to overlap like that. That's just kind of a weird thing that happened. It's fine. It'll be fine. All right, stitch on the other side. Under the over and over the under. All right, we'll speed through this to the end. All right, so I'm getting to about the halfway point, and these weird twisted stitches are really getting a little bit cool looking. Totally a design feature, not a flaw. I think this is a good example of showing you how like you can just work with what you've got. I had these big fat stitches, which was different from what I'm used to, and it got weird. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is instead of like trying to push this all the way up to the top, it's getting harder and harder to weave. So I'm gonna like switch at the midpoint to like how it wants to be now. So I'm basically going to weave the next row over on this side and then push it to the middle. So the middle is going to have this little twist. I think it'll look cool. Maybe I'll show you an example after this of a more normal weave. It's really like this method, the only important part is that you have like a fabric patch that's over your hole and that is tacked on around all the sides. And whatever else is going on, you know, you can get real experimental with it, have fun with it. No hard rules. So that's what I'm doing here. And just going up and down, how it is at the end. Till I get to the other side. Then when I get to the other side, I'm going to push it down to the middle. I use my fingers first to kind of pull it down. Be a little bit tricky here. Alright, so we're just pushing the twists to the middle. If you end up really liking how this looks, you can recreate it by kind of overlapping your weave at the beginning, like I did. You want to kind of keep it pulled while you're tightening it, or it's going to just like pull and loosen up like that. Just want to get it as dense as possible. And this is what you're going to be doing no matter how you're doing your weave. You're always going to want to push it as you go to create that dense fabric. I'm always in the habit of using the other side of my needle, just because even if it's a blunt needle, it's still like even blunter on that end, and I don't want to accidentally pull a thread out or something with the sharper ends, so I usually just use the back. If you're using a very blunt needle, like there's not really a need to use the back. But that's what I do just out of habit. All right, and then as we go and do more rows, we'll push it down more. I'm going to tack and just weave normally now. Now we got these nice straight lines. So again, you go over, under, opposite of the last row. Over, under. As you get closer and closer to the end, which I'm not very close to the end yet, but it gets a little bit trickier because you have less room to maneuver. So you want to make sure you're keeping it pushed down, give yourself as much room as possible. And when you get close to the end, you might just do like a couple stitches at a time and pull it out instead of doing a lot at a time, so as it gets harder. And we'll speed up now to the end. All right, so we're getting to the end. So you can probably see the last few rows get a bit harder. You're gonna kind of need to do like one stitch at a time so you can really get under those little stitches. Depending on what kind of needle you're using. And this one's just being really slippery for me, so I'm having a hard time controlling it. You know, you might get better at doing several at a time. The curved tip is nice because you can just hook one at a time. And I've been trying to really push stitches down, but it's hard in the middle there. It's a little bit like curved, so it's harder in the middle. Anyway, your point is to get as close as you can to the end. This is probably just going to be my last one because it's getting pretty tough. And reach the end. That's it. Same as the other one, like when you're done, you're done. There's no like final steps except for weaving your ends in. So I'm going to bring my end over here along with the other ends. And I'll show you how I weave in the ends now. This one, when I switched halfway, I forgot to bring it over to the side, so I'll do that right now. It's really a lot easier to handle the ends, I've found, if you do this little trick of bringing them about an inch over. See why in a second. So once that's all done, take your rubber band out and flip it inside out. And I like to use the mushroom for this step, but I don't use the rubber band. I just kind of use it to keep it smooth and just to prevent accidentally going through to the other side, you know, to the accidentally sewing it to itself, you know, as you weave it in. So what you want to do is just grab all these loops that you want to cross and just pull the ends to the wrong side. That's a long one. See, it's a lot easier than if you didn't do those extra loops. So now they're on the wrong side, and now you just weave them in, and I am not too precise at all about this. So it's the same basic idea as weaving in your knits, except you have like all these layers. You know, you have the layer of fabric and then the patch layer, so just kind of go on the inside of the layer. I just usually do like diagonal lines. I'll go like through the patch a little bit. Just kind of hook it in there. Just like diagonally across. And then you can just kind of hide the end on the inside. It's just do what you want with this part. It doesn't have to be precise at all, but just weave it in the back side, and the front side is invisible. And that is your weird patch. I'm going to show you another patch method that doesn't overlap like that. Again, just like that was a weird thing that happened here, but you might have a different weird thing that happens, and then you can deal with that in a fun way. This is not a super precise technique, so you just kind of go with the flow. Okay, this one, I had a couple of big holes. So I have this big hole right here, and another big hole right here that I did halfway already. I did the same curio with this. Could also use a sock yarn. This is a big fat knit, so definitely like use a sport weight or DK weight yarn even if you want to. I'm going to just show you the beginning of this. Just going to do it again, just to make sure you got all the steps and to not overlap the threads. Rubber band it on. Grab your yarn. I'm even going to skip the running stitch because the frame, because I do feel like that's kind of an optional step depending on what you're working with, and this is a really fat yarn. It doesn't need it for stability. So I'm just going to go across and see what you can do to keep the line straighter. Instead of just going over like that, you can go a little bit up, like more of an angle, so that they can stay close to each other but not overlap. Like that. All right, so I have this one that's already done to the end, so I'm going to switch over to that. So you can see how it's going like at an angle so that you don't end up with that overlapping thing that happened last time. With this one I think I just went through the same hole each time, so they're like right next to each other. When it's a really fat knit like this, you're just going to have to kind of deal with it in some way. And when you're working with a thinner knit, it's a little bit easier. All right, so we switched to the other hole where I had already half of it done. And I'm switching yarn to a hawthorn speckle yarn just to add some more color and just have like a textural variety. I thought it would be fun. And I'm switching to a long, very blunt, big needle because I think it'll be easier for the fabric that I'm using right now and the yarn. So with this one, the ends are kind of like coming out of the same hole every other one. So I just want to make sure I'm not accidentally overlapping them at all as I'm doing the first line. And then after that, it'll be easy. Ooh. See, that's kind of overlapping. All right. Over, under, over, under. All right, so the first time across, I made sure they're in the right order. And now tack that down. And go back the other way. And this is really easy with the super blunt, long needle. You can go all the way across in one go. I don't have to stop halfway through, which is nice. And you can kind of use it to push the row down. If you do that every time, if you use the needle to kind of push it, then just you can wait every 4 or 5 times. You can do that. You don't have to do it every time. Okay, so I'm just about done. I switched to a different color hawthorn for the last little bit when I ran out, just for fun. It looks like I was a little bit uneven. This is what happens if you're not super careful and precise, but it's fine. I'm going to show you what to do if you have a little extra bit. Basically, just are going to weave that extra bit by itself and fill in the holes. And this is the same kind of thing you would do if you wanted to do a shape, like a circle, or you would just weave you know, only the stitches that are in that part of the shape. And I'm gonna just kind of loop around that thread there and go back. And this was such a little bit, it's just that one back and forth is gonna be enough. But yeah, you can totally make shapes beyond rectangles by, well, maybe I'll do this little bit right here by just doing parts of it, and you can have a lot of fun experimenting with shapes and stuff that way. And I'll just do that and then be done. So here is that patch. I'll weave in the ends later, but you can see how that looks. And because it's a pretty thin yarn on a fatter surface, it's like nice and smooth, not really sticking out. But like I showed you this one at the beginning, this is a sock yarn on like a thinner, not hand knit sock. So this is a heavier patch on a lighter weight background, which works fine too. If you really mind having, you know, like feeling that when you're wearing it on your heel, or especially if it's like on your toe or something, you might mind it, then just go with the same or thinner like this, and you can see it's gonna be like more smooth and like not stick out. But yeah, that's the technique. I showed you this at the beginning and I didn't really show you, but it's the same as what I did around the sides of the hole. When you're just doing the running stitch back and forth and you're not really worrying about actually weaving over under exactly, just do that over a thinned out area to prevent a hole from forming. So you can use this technique as a preventative technique, decorative, if you just like how it looks. Just find spots on your garments that are getting a little bit thin and just do it as a decorative thing to prevent holes from forming. As of course, it's going to be easier to get to a hole when it's smaller, so letting it get bigger and bigger. But if it does get big, you can do a giant patch, same technique. You got the tools you need to have fun with it.